is if you find yourself in a hole, then stop digging. That whatever you're afraid of doing, that is your calling spiritually. That is your soul saying, hey, go through that, because when you go through that, you're going to expand even more in a soulful, spiritual, energetic way. You are where your attention is. Meaning when it comes to doing something, you might have to give up your anger. You might have to give up your shame. You might have to give up your cockiness, whatever it might be for you. And a lot of times we don't want to give those things up, but we have to look at how much attention that consumes in us. You're listening to the Transform Your Life from the Inside Out podcast. This episode is titled Conversations with a Sorcerer, How to Meditate 24/7, Part 3. In the last couple of episodes, we've talked about living in meditation 24/7. We've talked about the ego of the container that we live in, the body is skin, the human identity. We've talked about nurturing the divine self. We've talked about, eliminating the interference between the smaller part of us and the larger part of us. And in this episode, I want to dig a little bit deeper and then intentionally, hopefully, tie it all together for you at the end of this episode. So let's keep talking about how to live in meditation 24/7. Keep listening. So in this episode, we want to continue talking about how to live in meditation 24/7. Now, as I've mentioned in other episodes, Don Javier will hop around a lot and then weave it all back together. So I call it the weave. I want to actually just hop around here a second. And in the last episode, we talked about spiritual ego, and we talked about how many of us let the little part of us, meaning our spiritual ego, meaning our 3D ego, control the bigger part, our divine self, our divine mind, our soul energy, which is housed in the physical body. And we do that through being cocky, through being arrogant, through getting in shame, anger, fear, all these kind of negative things. And the big takeaway was we have to be careful with the body, the smallest part of us, taking over the divine being in the body. And so in this episode, what I want to pick up with and continue talking about is ways that we do it and a myriad of other topics related to living in meditation 24/7. So he went on to say, to continue here, he went on to say that many times people come from nothing. And his example was they might create a big business, they may make a lot of money, but then what a lot of people do is they become slaves to what they created. And his exact comment was, and he never says things in a judgmental type of way, he says them more in a matter-of-fact type of way, but his exact comment is when we come from nothing, we came to the planet with nothing, we come, then we create all these amazing things that are all of the 3D ego, money, whatever it might be, and then many times we become slaves to those very things that we create. And he said that is the most absurd thing to do. Because many times people who create, great fortunes, they worry about losing it, but they didn't come here with all of this. And basically what he's saying is when we get into so we create these things in the physical world, the homes, the cars, the relation, whatever, the money, whatever it is, many times we live in fear of losing all those things. Those things are not from our soul per se, and we live in complete fear of these things we've created. These things control us, and they create interference between the lower part of us, the 3D ego, and the higher part of us. He's very humble. He started apprenticing with shamans when he was a little boy in Mexico. And he's always very humble. And he said, the interesting part of the little me, meaning him, he goes, the interesting part of the little me is that the little me is constantly trying to take over, thinking it is in control of the being side of the body in the body, because we're beings. And he said that cannot be. and he said, all of your angers, a lot of people listening have anger issues. Anybody disagrees with you, you fly off the handle. You have shame issues, major fear issues, etc. By the way, a lot of these are learned and we habituate them. But he said, all of your anger and resentments, they take over the divine being of you, and that mutilates the divine in you with nonsense. I want to repeat that. All your anger, your resentments, they take over the divine being of you, and that mutilates the divine in you with nonsense. A couple of days ago this weekend, by choice, I work a lot, but this weekend I just decided not to really do anything on Sunday, and I'm just kind of thumbing through YouTube. And I saw a program, not YouTube, sorry, Netflix, YouTube also, but Netflix. And there was this program titled something like Earth Without Humans. I found the title fascinating. But it talked about what would happen on the planet in terms of overgrowth of vegetation and different things without human interference. And what I'm talking to you now about, we let all of our angers and resentments and all these kind of things, our shame and all these kind of things that many people bathe themselves in, we let that take over, and it's like an overgrown weed patch. And that metaphor just came to mind as I'm sharing this with you now. It's like a weed patch, and we let that control us, but it's all toxicity. And so many of us, of course, we all have emotions. Our emotions are here to guide us and to guide the physical body, but many of us get trapped in our negative emotions. And not only do many times we get trapped, which then it's a distortion between the higher and lower self, but many of us love to wallow in the negative emotions. And this conversation progressed, and he went on to say, is that when we do that, and I've never seen him do that, 28 years being around him a lot, I've never seen him get into his emotions and then the emotions controlling him or him lashing out. I've never seen him lash out at anyone or anything like that. But he said, all these emotions that we get into, the fear, the worry, the ego, the greed, the shame, etc., this separates the little from the big part of me, meaning the 3D ego part of me from divine mind, from spirit. But then he went on to say, that is choice. And he went on to say, the little you is very powerful, meaning your 3D ego. And if you feed the little you, you create more of that ego in the little you, and then you're going to be sick as a dog. And he could mean, because we do whatever happens in the mind will happen in the body. So when he says sick as a dog, that could be physically sick, mentally sick, emotionally sick, whatever it might be. So for me, think about something bad happening. And then you look at, the more you think about that, the what if in life that creates so much worry for people. Think about that for a moment. What if? What if my business was not a success? What if I get a divorce? What if I ask them out and they turn me down? What if people laugh at me? What if people say I'm not good enough? What if people do this, that, or the other? But what I want you to notice in you, when you're focusing on the what if, what are you feeding in you? Because many times for many people, that leads to just a bout of overthinking and rumination, angry rumination, depressive rumination, the what if, approach to life. What if something goes wrong? What if it goes wrong? What if it goes wrong? And then many times we're projecting these feelings on a lot of people, that they're thinking things about us. If this goes wrong, they're going to think this. But what I want you to notice, I remember when I was on a sacred journey with Don Javier to Palenque, Mexico, around 2004 or so. And we were in the jungles at Palenque, the tomb of, I'll just say that, in Palenque, which is a very, very, lots of greenery and very overgrown in a lot of places. All these monkeys were jumping from the trees, from tree to tree to tree. And that's the example that he was giving, and I'm sharing with you here, is that when we get into this what if this goes wrong, what if this goes bad, what if, anger rumination, I can't believe they did this to me, they're that kind of person, or depressive rumination, people aren't going to like me, and I'm not attractive enough, and I'm not this, and I'm not that. The bigger point, it's a choice. It's a choice when we do that to stay in it. That monkey brain, like he says, a tree full of monkeys, and we just stay in the tree full of monkeys, jumping branch to branch to branch. But the bigger question, and you might have heard me say before, which I learned from him, and in my opinion, it's the most powerful thing I've ever learned, is he taught me many years ago, you are where your attention is. Now, what I'm talking about, the monkey mind, the monkey, not monkey mind, monkey brain, mind and brain are very different, and the trees jumping from branch to branch to branch to branch. The question for you, where is your attention? Because you cannot put your attention on the little monster of the ego destroying the conduit, the communication, the pathway between the little you and the big you, the divine you. And when you put your attention on the what ifs and the rumination and the positive and the negative rumination and the angry rumination and the projection and cognitive distortions and all these kind of things, you cut off the divineness in you. Okay? So ponder this. It's not your soul energy and your divine mind destroying you. It's your little ego. It's that little monster in you. And I'm going to be just transparent as I can, especially in my 20s. I met Don Javier when I was 32 and I'm 59 now. In my 20s, this little monster in me was a real bitch. I mean, it was just constant what if worry, what if I do this and if it doesn't work? What if I do this and I can't pay my rent? What if I do this? What if? And I've recognized over the years, the more that I've actually taken or eliminated that what if out of my way of being, the easier life becomes and the easier life gets. So when we go into all of these things that I just talked about that divide and create like a barrier, a wall between the higher self and the lower self, we're definitely not living in meditation 24/7, but we're also jeopardizing what we're to do spiritually while we are here on the planet. I'll say that again, we're jeopardizing our spiritual mission. You know, I've said before, and a lot of people just it doesn't register, that whatever you're afraid of doing, that is your calling spiritually. That is your soul saying, hey, go through that, because when you go through that, you're going to expand even more in a soulful, spiritual, energetic way. Maybe a different metaphor that'll help some of you guys. I read this a lot of years ago and it helped me, as simple as it is. So when you're hopping around from tree to tree to tree, worry to worry to worry, ego, a metaphor that I read that changed a lot of things for me, or a passage that I read, is if you find yourself in a hole, then stop digging. So if you find yourself in the hole of the fear, the worry, the ego, the arrogance, the cockiness, the whatever it might be, the shame, stop freaking digging. Because your digging is a metaphor for what are you feeding. And you affect yourself, just like food you put in your body, the same thing you put in your mind, you affect yourself by the energy you're holding, which is where you keep your attention. And then where we have, like for many of us that have a lot of garbage in our life, that's because that's where our attention is in feeding the things that bring the garbage into our lives. So the question is, do you want to jeopardize the divine being in you? And you have the choice. You have free will, and you can do whatever you want to do, and no one can tell you to do any differently. However, you're putting your soul mission in jeopardy. That's my phrase, not his, okay? But you have choice because you're co-creating. Most people don't look at it this way. You're co-creating. We think we're co-creating with the world outside of us. We're co-creating building a business. But no. What about in you? What about in this being of you, you're co-creating mind and body, but we can't create the body, meaning the physical identity that controls the mind. That's when you put yourself in spiritual jeopardy. He went on to say, every time I come into this little body, meaning every time he reincarnates, my goal is to come better than the time before. And he has said that for many years. He's even said before that I have fulfilled my dharma on this planet, but I keep coming back because, and by the way, any of you we can go to other star systems once we leave this body. And that may be a little too far out there for some people, but the reality is your energy, your consciousness. Anything else has you grounded in human thinking. And he's always said, but I come back because of the gifts that I can bring. I get more brownie points, so to speak. So when I come back, I always want to come back stronger than the time before when I left the time before. So he goes, that's what I want to transpire on myself, is coming back, being of greater service each and every time I come back. Now, I've never asked him how many times he's been on the planet, how many times you've been on the planet. I don't know, but make no mistake, I can't wait till it's common thinking for people to recognize that we do come back energetically. Nothing dies. And these illusions that we have, this nonsensical thinking we have as humans, that we're born and we die and that's the end of it, and then we go to heaven or wherever, it's nonsensical, it's metaphorical. And I'm not trying to actually get you to stop your spirituality. I want you to expand your spirituality, okay? He talked about living from convenience. And I can relate to this one as well, mainly living from spiritual convenience. But he was sharing in this episode, not this episode, but this conversation, something that I knew about that he was working on. He was working on a spiritual network that included spiritual tools. Doesn't matter what they are, but I was well aware of what he was doing. No, wasn't well aware. I was aware of what he was doing. And he created some tools for many, many people all around the planet. And he said to me, or people he was talking to that day, that I want to do all that, meaning all of that work. And he goes, no. And he said, even using a word in Spanish, which I won't repeat, but basically it was one hell of a lot of work. And he goes, I didn't want to do it. I didn't plan to do it. I just did what they told me to do and what I was guided to do. And I turn around a year later, and what a masterpiece that was created. But what he was saying is, I didn't get into my convenience. I didn't get into my arrogance and my ego about, well, this isn't convenient for me right now, or I don't want to. I don't have the energy to do this. He did what he needed to do for spiritual growth and spiritual service. The whole point to you is that we have to do even things we don't want to do that help us grow spiritually. And for many here, that could be more than anything. What things do you have to do in terms of what things must you give up to grow and evolve spiritually? Meaning when it comes to doing something, you might have to give up your anger. You might have to give up your shame. You might have to give up your cockiness, whatever it might be for you. And a lot of times we don't want to give those things up, but we have to look at how much attention that consumes in us. And we keep these things because it's convenient to keep them. You know, to simplify this, when I look at personal development, it's pretty amazing the amount of people that will choose not, and I'm just saying this, that will choose not to work with someone that can help them because it's not convenient money-wise or time-wise or energy-wise. And they'll keep beating their head against the wall, complaining about their life, not even recognizing they're living out of their own convenience. Not convenient for me money-wise. I don't have the money, and it's easier for me to just lie at home and watch Netflix than it is to get the money to do this to better my life. But the whole point is they won't leave their little convenience to create an expansion in life. And that's the little us controlling the bigger part of us. I do want to point out that he went on to say, and he said this for many years as well, is it has nothing to do with money. And he even mentioned, I remember this conversation because I wrote it down. He said, I remember a time when money was not as we know it now. It was gold and silver in exchange, meaning thousands of years ago. But he went on to say is we cannot jeopardize ourselves by living in the small self. We cannot jeopardize ourselves because we're chasing money or hoarding money. And basically he was saying it's just quantum mechanics is what he was talking about. But the whole point in these episodes, and I jumped around a lot, and especially in this one, is the more you remove the obstacles between the little you, meaning the ego you, the bag of skin, and the divine you, the more personal power you gain. The more personal power you gain, the more you can obviously live in a meditation 24/7, but you can also live in the higher realms, meaning the higher realms of frequency and the higher realms of energy. So I want to leave you with that thought. There are many other things that I could say here, and I do make notes when I do all this, and I'm just scrolling them in here very quickly as I'm talking to you guys. But that's the whole point, is removing the confluence, the obstacles between the lower self and the higher self so that we can live in meditation 24/7. We can live in peace of mind 24/7. We can live in harmony 24/7. And that's a blissful experience on the planet when we live from those places. So what I want to do is go back and I want to recapitulate the transformational takeaways from the last episode into this episode. And a phrase that I said last time is, in our time on the planet, we have to bring together the cohesiveness between the body and the being in the body. And that our goal, objective, is to live in meditation 24/7. How to do that? We have to start living, number 2, from the inside out, not the outside in. Number 3, which I talked about mostly in this episode, is getting out of the emotions that literally drain us, getting out of the emotions of the ego. I've said it probably 3 times now. I'll say it again, which applies to you. Fear, shame, arrogance, cockiness, anger is a big one. Self-pity is another big one for a lot of people. And even as I say that, you might not identify with what I said. And you might say, well, Jim, none of those apply to me. But what I want to point out, I guarantee that what I said, something applies to people listening. I mean, we're on the planet doing our work, but we become so anesthetized to these things, not even recognizing we live in this kind of way because we have habituated it. I remember a student of mine in the transformational coaching program. She stayed around for about 2 years. And when I first mentioned self-pity, never registered at all with her, just didn't dawn on her. And about the end of our time together, she's like, oh my God, it just dawned on me. I spend so much of my life in self-pity, not even recognizing that we do it. But the point is, the fear of the ego, the fear of the ego, the shame, all these kind of things, these are all egotistical things, but they drain the energy. And when we drain the energy, we create more obstruction between the higher self and the lower self. And then finally, what are your codes? What are your ways of being? What ways can you nurture in your life, things that you can do, even though they might not be a convenience? What things can you do to nurture the divineness in you? I'm going to tell you a personal perspective. Many times, they ain't convenient. I'll tell you that right now. Hell, I want to go here. I want to go there. I want to do this. I want to do that. I don't have time for it. I've been there, beat my head against the wall. And what I've learned, it's better to surrender to the will of the divine essence in us rather than trying to fight it with the willpower of the ego. Because what will win every single time, no question about it, like David and Goliath, but it's actually Goliath. Actually, that wasn't a good metaphor. Things just pop into my mind as I go. What will always win is, in the long run, is the power of the soul, the power of divine mind, because your ego is finite and your soul is infinite. So we've got to live and nurture that part of us to bring more joy, more peace, more tangential things that we want as physical beings on the planet, which then ties back to living in meditation 24/7. Hopefully, my intention, my wish is I conveyed this in a way that was entertaining. It gave you food for thought, and at least it gave you some platform to start thinking from as you want to start living from the inside out to create a better experience while you're on the planet. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you over on another episode. Bye-bye.